Okay, let's jump into it. There appeared to be trouble in paradise in a Joe Budden podcast approximately 2.5 months ago when the co-hosts Rory and Maul were just missing. And what Joe Budden said is that they needed some time off and their seats are still here. This is not his seat when he moved over, and he had two other people there. He had Ice and Ish. Two of his longtime friends, two older gentlemen. And the whole vibe of the podcast seemed easier. And this is why. About, I would say, a good 2 months leading up to that, I noticed a lot of tension between especially Joe Budden and Rory, who's a longtime producer and been with the podcast since, I believe, the beginning. Maul came in episode 77 when it was still called I'll name this podcast later. And Maul, who was cracking jokes and kind of the life of the party before, was really laid back and subdued. And Rory literally invited Joe Budden to the hands. And then he said, let's step outside a couple of times. And I mean, on air, it seemed a little more than lighthearted banter. I know with my adult friends and even my good friends, I'm not inviting anybody to go outside and fight, whether I want to or mean it or not, because as men, there's always a low-level threat. And what's going to happen eventually is someone's going to say, hey, it's not the day for this, and you say it again, and then you actually have to go outside and put up or shut up. So when I seen that, I knew that it was a little odd, and when Rory and Maul were missing, I knew that things had come to a head. So let's all unpack this and realize what exactly happened. And of course, this is just my theory because nobody knows. Nobody's seen the paperwork. And all of this, I'm sure, will come out sooner and later. So Joe Budden, about 3 years ago, signed a multi-million-dollar Spotify deal where he did 2 podcasts a week on Spotify for 2 years. During this time, the Joe Budden podcast exploded in popularity. It was available on Spotify and on YouTube, which I watch because I like to watch visual podcasts. And a lot of things, it seemed like, were going well for the Joe Budden podcast, especially when the renegotiations were coming up. Because when you start renegotiating a contract and you're doing well, you have all the power. And there were these crazy rumors going around that Joe Budden possibly wanted $250 million, which is a lot more than just what Joe Rogan got, which was like $100 million, plus a lot of advertising and things on the back end. We all know that Joe Rogan is incredibly rich, and Joe Budden, who has and did have the most popular podcast on Spotify, the most popular growth metrics, said, well, hell, if I've outgrown all of these folks and I've kind of built a house of podcasts, maybe I'm not expecting 150 million up front, but hey, how about 80 million with some money on the back end? Whatever the rumors was that it came up to, like, he wanted about $200 million together, and Spotify said no. They did come on air and unpack it when he said no, Spotify did offer us more money than we ever seen, but they wanted all of my intellectual property. So what I did with Revolt, they wanted a part of. What I did independently, they wanted a part of. And so he really just railed against them for the creators and said, fuck you, we'll go independent, and signed a deal with Cash App as their main sponsor, and then signed a deal with Patreon, which he was made the director of content creation or something like that. Some lofty title, which just means they're paying a motherfucker a shit ton of money to keep his content there. Okay, so this is my theory of when things went wrong. I believe that in the Spotify deal, that Rory and Maul were actually partners with the Joe Budden podcast in the Spotify deal. And this is what I mean. I've done deals with people in music before, and I kind of operated as an independent contractor, but my company has been able to partner with other companies just for a project. And for this project, or for this length of time, I am a partner in everything that we do, meaning that I'm not paid up front. I'm paid a percentage on the back end. How the percentages on the back end work, just for in case anybody doesn't know, it works that if you as an individual put a certain amount of time into a project, instead of getting paid on an employee for hire basis, which a lot of artists do wind up getting paid, a lot of writers get paid because you want money up front, even though it's maybe $100,000, maybe $150,000, might be a bag, not $1 million bag, but a big bag for if you're struggling, right? And then what happens is that you turn around with that $150,000, that's all you're going to get. So if the project turns around and makes 20 or 30 or 40 million dollars, you're only stuck with that $250,000. So I believe that this multi-million-dollar Spotify deal, Rory and Mal were getting money on the back end, that they were partners with it. They may have partnered their particular and individual LLCs with Joe Budden's LLC to sign that deal. This can happen. You can just have an umbrella deal where, you know, you're a subsidiary, and because you're putting in value, because you're adding value, you get a certain percentage, even though your percentage is going to be a lot smaller than the main attraction, who's Joe Budden. I believe that when Joe Budden deaded the Spotify deal, and that, trust me, the deal all revolved around him being happy. The other two guys were going to be more than happy with that because it's probably more money than they were ever going to fucking see at that particular time. So when he deaded that deal and then he went independent, he's back to, here, I'm Joe Budden. You guys are probably back to the original contract before where you're just working for me. Maybe you're a contractor. Maybe you make a certain amount of money a year. It could be handsome. He mentioned that I'm not going to let people sit around and become millionaires. So he may be actually paying them $1 million a fucking year. You know, maybe it's 500,000, whatever. It's probably something handsome. I don't think the gentlemen are starving to death. I know that the rumors are that the Joe Budden podcast has 30 employees working for them, and they're all paid fairly well. But they do work hard. They're expected to pump out product. They're expected to have the sound right. They're expected to do a lot of prep work. They're expected to have things going on, graphics. And so he does expect a lot from them. And then I believe that it's 2 podcasts a week and 2 Patreons a week. So he has those folks working their asses off, and they're all employees for hire. With that being said, Joe is probably getting a shit ton of money from Patreon, and it seems that Rory and Mal wanted to audit to see what their percentage was. They probably, and because this is the only thing that makes sense. If he's saying, what the fuck, you work for me, you're an employee, why are you trying to audit me? Right? Because I can't go and audit my day job company. I can't go to whatever healthcare company I work for, which I won't say, and say, hey, I want to audit to see how. No, I get a salary. That's what I get. I get bonus based off of metrics. But I can, if I'm partnering with somebody, say, hey, you're paying me a percentage on the back end. I want to audit to make sure that percentage is correct. I've done that before, and what happens is that it's a very uncomfortable time. So that's why I let lawyers deal with it. I don't talk about it at all. And when they come, I say, hey, my lawyers think that there could be something there. I told them to go ahead and do it. My lawyers talk to your lawyers. We can keep ourselves out of it and be friends. And that's what I've done because I'm a professional. And this is where my biggest problem with Joe Budden comes. Firing someone publicly on the air only happens in our culture. And basically, I'm going to say this, it really only happens with black people. I mean, I hate to say it. I've never seen like an Italian fire somebody in public on the air. Usually what happens with corporations when they fire somebody is that they usually say something like, listen, this person's no longer with us. They've gone on to pursue other endeavors. Even politicians, when the leadership of the Democrat or Republican Party, and let's say the House, talks to someone that says, look, you're not gonna make it. We're not gonna back you. You're fucked and you need to leave. What they say is, I've left to focus on family and spend time with family. There's always some song and dance, but they don't come and just overly publicly fire people like that. It's distasteful. And, you know, Joe Budden does have an absolute history of doing this. And it's something that we should look at. He's imploded over Complex. He's imploded over Spotify. And now he's imploded over his own podcast with folks. Not saying that he's not going to do something. Trust me, he's going to do a podcast with academics because that's what he wants to do anyway. They're going to argue. It's going to be great content. Everyone's going to eat it up. But it is fair to say that Joe Budden, who was all for the creators, is now slowly transitioning into the machine that he raged against in his last album. And I think that's super interesting and something that we should look for in the future. I think it's also like a lot of content creators have to realize that once you start making a lot of money, the people you came up with who really feel like they have more investment than you because maybe you're the main driver or the main talent, perhaps you need to look at them and straighten out your business of what they get in the splits right away. If it's just money and they're an employee for hire, they're just a contractor, they're just a 1099 motherfucker, you need to make that established so they don't come back and say, hey, you know, this was great when you were paying me $7,000 a month, which is actually great money where I'm living, but now it looks like you're driving a fucking new Jag and I'm still in my Honda Accord and I want $10,000 a month because you're making more money. Well, and you won't have to go through those uncomfortable negotiations where you can say, well, this is what your contract says. So, like, when your contract is up, let's do this. Or you're a 1099 employee. If you wish to renegotiate for splits, I'm going to pay you a lot less on the upfront and you can get a little money on the back end. Just the fact that Joe Budden was so upset when they were trying to audit him and he fired them means that, I mean, you don't fire partners. You split with partners. So I think that perhaps they were partners in the Spotify deal, but not partners in a Patreon deal. Because I know that since Joe announced the Patreon deal and they knew nothing about it, they were very salty and the podcast has folded. I think this is the end of the era. I think that this podcast was excellent. It was a really great hip hop podcast. And I think that Joe Budden will continue making content, but he really damaged his reputation as a leader. I mean, who the fuck would work for you if you're going to fire them on the air? I mean, we have to stop doing stupid shit like this, and we have to start being responsible for our own actions and how we treat people. And this is what I mean. If you're fucking me over, and I know you are, I should part with you, and I don't have to make it public why I'm parting with you. You know, hey, here's a non-compete, here's a little money, fuck off. And that's how you do that, when you have the bag. And Joe Budden has several bags. So that's my take on the Joe Budden podcast. What do you guys think? Once again, it's a happiness podcast, and this is G's take on the Joe Budden podcast. End of an era. No more, no more, no more, no more. You guys take care. Take care of yourself. Ask yourself, could you handle the tip? Booty in your face.